Okay, so for those that don't know me or don't know me all that well, my name is David Hearnes. I'm the Executive Director of Blount Mansion. I'd like to welcome everybody for coming out tonight. I know there's a lot of competition for things to do on a Thursday, but coming here to hear me yak about the Blounts and their businesses, I'm just glad you did. So, to start off with, I think the best thing would be to talk about who the Blounts were first. You know, that kind of put a little context on it. Going back far enough, the Blounts are actually Danish, but the Blounts are French originally, come across with William the Conqueror in 1066 as Le Blount, and then very quickly anglicized into just Blount, and are Catholic. English don't do very well during the English Civil War and start needing to kind of find new places, and they were encouraged to immigrate to the United States, to the colonies, and it was a good moneymaker. If you could bring colonists to the colony, the crown would reward you with land. And so very early on, one of William's ancestors, Thomas Blount, immigrates to Virginia, gets a good chunk of acreage for bringing over some settlers, and then due to the competition in land, the family very quickly moves down to North Carolina. There's a lot more land available, a lot less competition, and a lot of opportunity. So William's father, Jacob, who is really the member of the Blount family who you can point to that is the reason that William and his brothers are the way they are. And so initially, William's father is born around Bath, North Carolina. Ends up marrying and moving up to around Washington, and ends up having a very, very large family. William has, I believe, 6 brothers and 2 sisters with his mother, and I think 3 more or 4 more with his stepmother. Either way, has a very large family. And William and his brothers grow up basically learning life and learning business from his father. William's father, Jacob, is a very, very busy man, and is basically, if there's money to be made in the colony, they're finding a way to do it. So, you know, everything from farming to shipping to stores to naval stores, things such as tar, pitch, rope, things like that, horse racing, and unfortunately buying and selling human beings. So just to kind of address that right off the top, the Blounts did not shy away from investing in slaves, but I wouldn't call it a core part of their business, you know. But they certainly didn't shy away from it. If there was money to be made or a debt needed to be paid, they certainly did not mind buying and selling humans. Growing up, William is really, well, let's do it this way. So the main players in the Blount's business interests are going to be William, his younger brother John Gray Blount, his brother Thomas, and then eventually his younger half-brother Wiley Blount. And they are the ones who are really, you know, the main driving force behind a lot of the Blount's businesses. And I would say the core, as I kind of mentioned, the core groups are going to be farming, naval stores, land speculation, shipping, and tied in with that, and the reason I have the map up actually is one of their most lucrative businesses was actually out here on the Ocracoke Inlet at Shell Castle. We'll get to that here in just a little bit. And then just kind of a little bit of everything. Okay, so one of the probably biggest ways that William made money was in land speculation. After the Revolution, well, before the Revolution, the Crown really limited the amount of lands that were available to the colonists west of the mountains. So they had made strong alliances with the natives that were out here, especially the Cherokee and the Chickasaw, to support them in their wars against the French. And so King George was very serious about making sure that their lands were respected, their rights were respected. And so a lot of the white colonists were really upset that all this land's available, and if it wasn't for, you know, the natives living on it, they would have, you know, basically unlimited land, but the crown stopped them. But once the crown's out of the way, and I have a feeling that's probably why a lot of folks in North Carolina supported the Patriot cause, was because they saw vast benefit to themselves, aside from just being able to govern themselves, to be able to get the lands that they were claiming all the way to the Mississippi River, essentially. North Carolina on the maps ran from the Atlantic all the way to the Mississippi. Pretty funny looking state when you look at it. South Carolina and Virginia and everything just went all the way as far west as they could possibly get it. So once the crown's out of the way, everybody immediately starts eyeballing this huge, vast tract of land west of the mountains. There were several attempts early on, the Transylvania Act and everything, where they're trying to take this land, and eventually they end up with what they call the Land Grab Act, and it basically said any land west of the mountains, North Carolina's going to sell. I think it was $4 for 100 acres or something. It was insanely cheap. And they sold 4 million acres in about 10 minutes, and then basically shut down sales. And the land speculation became a huge business. William, having money and desiring to basically not have to necessarily sweat for a living, thought being able to buy and sell huge tracts of land was probably a great way to make money. So he and his partners basically put huge amounts of money towards buying up this acreage. And as luck would have it, the North Carolina government, needing to settle their debts with the soldiers who had fought, paid them in land. So basically they said, you know, if you're a private, you get 100 acres. If you're an officer, you get, basically whatever your rank was and your length of service, you got more and more land for it. But the problem was, it's all west of the mountains. You have to go find it, survey it, and then turn it in and have the state sign off on it, which is risky and dangerous, and not everybody was willing to do this. And so here come people like William Blount to be like, hey, I know you have this land, so I'll give you $1 an acre if it's worth 10. So he would buy it for pennies on the dollar and basically buy up these tracts, bundle them together, and sell them to someone else who's actually going to go out and put the land, to actually do the surveys and actually put the land, into use. A lot of people, including Dr. Maggart, who's on our board, see this as a very nefarious thing, and it was taking advantage of veterans and this, but at the same time, he didn't force them to do it, and a lot of these men really had no interest in going out and risking a life on the frontier when they had farms already, or they were more comfortable, being in eastern North Carolina, because the land was wild, unsettled, and the Native Americans had no interest in giving it up. And so you might be out wandering around in the mountains and never come home because a Cherokee or Choctaw took offense to you being there and decided that you're better off not being around. So this is a huge business opportunity, and is one of the main driving reasons why Blount lobbies to become territorial governor. So North Carolina also has to settle their debts with the federal government, and being land rich and cash poor, they just say basically, what if we just give you everything west of the mountains that we have, and you turn it into a new territory, and we just call it even. The federal government said, great. Create the territory of the United States south of the River Ohio. And Blount, once again, seeing the opportunity, lobbies through prominent North Carolina politicians to become territorial governor. So he's named territorial governor by General Washington, reporting to this beautiful man here, Lieutenant General Henry Knox, the head of the War Department. Comes over the mountains and basically sets up shop here in what becomes East Tennessee. His whole job is to essentially set up the mechanisms of government in the new territory and to push for statehood. His side gig is basically he still owns, between himself and his brothers, there's about 4 million acres of land that they have between the territory, northern Alabama, northern Georgia, different places. And so kind of working behind the scenes through agents, he's still buying and selling large tracts of land. This leads to some, accusations of using his position to better himself, and they're probably right. But at the same time, in the time that Blunt's growing up, or that William's growing up, it is very common for the royal governors, the reason they took on these appointments was so they could enrich themselves. So they oversee, good justice and the betterment of the people in the colony, but they also made money and bettered themselves in the process. That was the trade-off. So, it's easy to look back and kind of point fingers and say, you shouldn't have done that, but at the same time, that was common and that's the way he grew up. So, I think one of the interesting things that I've seen personally involving the Blunt's land deals is my wife and I were driving through Middle Tennessee, just exploring, and we came across War Trace, Tennessee. I don't know if anybody's ever been to War Trace, but they have one of their, Tennessee state marker signs. And it was actually one of the chunks of land that William and his brothers had bundled together, and they turned around and sold to Andrew Jackson. And so Jackson was a political protege and a friend of the Blunts, and so I think it was 300,000 acres or something around War Trace that they bundled and sold. So it's just one of those things you find it out there in the wild, and it was like, okay. So yeah. So land definitely ends up being William's undoing, though. One of the main things that you learn in business is diversify, and being solely invested in land ends up being what cost Blunt his political future, his fortune, and eventually, I believe, personally, his life, in that when the Spanish and the French started making noise like they were going to shut down the Mississippi River for American commercial traffic, and they were also sort of threatening us through what is now Florida. Land prices in Middle and West Tennessee dropped, and Blunt was so heavily invested there that, say, if you paid $1 an acre for it, it's now worth 10 cents. All of this money just evaporates. So kind of like 2008, all of this wealth just basically vanishes overnight due to the market in land dropping, which makes him get involved in an ill-conceived and ill-concealed conspiracy to try to take on the Spanish and the French, to invite the British back to North America to take on the Spanish and the French in the Mississippi Valley in Florida. He gets caught. It costs him his position in the Senate, and so therefore he's here in the spring of 1800 when there's a yellow fever epidemic that hits. So he becomes ill and dies. And if it hadn't been for that, he probably would have been in Philadelphia, still in the Senate at the time, and would have missed out on all the mosquito-borne illnesses at the time. So I do believe that his singular focus on buying and selling land eventually cost him his position and his life. But his brothers, John Gray and Thomas, were much smarter, I guess, in the long run than William, and were much more diverse in their business holdings. So they buy and sell land just like William did, but they also had stores in several different places in Carolina at the time, and especially in Washington. They had one of the largest mercantile businesses in the entire state, and they are bringing in goods on their own ships and buying from other importers from Asia, from Europe, Central and South America, from the Caribbean. They're pulling in both raw materials and finished goods from pretty much all over the world at the time. And to think that it's all coming into a little town there in North Carolina. But getting there was the problem. And this leads to one of their more, I think, probably one of the most interesting businesses that they had, and that's here at Shell Castle Island. So Shell Castle starts off, well, let me back up. So a little bit of geography on North Carolina, a lot of coastline, but there's also what they call the Outer Banks, which is barrier islands and reefs, and everything offshore, that it was very, very hard for sailing ships, deep draft sailing ships, to get across. And so, in partnership with a gentleman by the name of John Wallace, who was a pilot, found a spot just off the Ocracoke Inlet where they could, which was a little tiny island, which still exists, that they could basically add on to create a, they call it like an entrepot, but it was a essentially like a base just here where ships could come up, and they ran a lightering service. And so they had small ships with a very shallow draft that would go across the bar, take off cargo to lighten the ship up enough that it could get up and over the bar. They would pull the shell castle, reload, refit, restore, get water. There was actually wharfs, a warehouse, a tavern, grist mills, places for them to stay. And so the boats could have a safe anchorage for them to reload, to prepare, and then were able to go to a lot of the intercoastal parts of North Carolina, including all the way up to Washington and New Bern, where the Blunts had a lot of their businesses. And so it was a very smart move, and they actually promoted the business by having a very detailed map made of the coast of Carolina that focused on getting across the bar, and they would basically give this to people to say, hey, this is what it looks like, this is where you need to come, and people were attracted to come and use their services, and even created a, what they call a Liberty jug, or a Liverpool jug, advertising that Shell Castle exists. And so part of the reason we know what it looks like is they actually, they actually did a souvenir jug of it. And by a weird coincidence, was watching the Antiques Roadshow one night, and they pulled one of these up, and were like, it's an unknown subject, and I'm like, it's like, do you have any idea how valuable that is? And so it was actually one of the shell castles. They're like, don't know much about it, but apparently it was a thing, and it was like, so. But they were really, really crafty at being able to advertise and to show people that this was a service. And it was incredibly successful. Somebody offered to basically take it over and to buy it from John Gray Blunt and Wallace, and said they would give them enough silver to cover the entire island. And they still said no. They were making that much money off of it. So, they have incoming cargo and everything, but they're also exporting a lot of material. And North Carolina, what are they known? They're known as the Tar Heel State. That's one of the main exports that they had at the time, and it's all related to longleaf pine. So there are immense longleaf pine forests in North Carolina at the time, and they produce basically everything that you would need for sailing ships. They're growing hemp for rope, for sail. They are producing an immense amount of pitch and tar, and that comes from the sap of the pine trees. And so they are able to utilize the forest that they have, and I learned a lot about how they actually do it, and it was very labor intensive, and was, depending on the person, a lot of it was through slave labor. They basically would set up camps there in the forest and work on, basically each man would be responsible somewhere for around 2,500 trees apiece. And they would use a specifically designed axe to create these cuts in the outside of the tree, forming kind of like a shelf. And they would do this all through the winter. And then when the sap would start to come, they basically had some men who would actually spoon the sap out of the ledge, essentially. And the other people were working on refining it down into pitch and tar, and eventually later on, well later in the 19th century, into turpentine and other distillates as well. But a lot of the distillation was actually done in New England. But it's super labor intensive, and it is, depending on how you do it, is really bad for the trees as well. So they end up killing a lot of the trees just through being a little bit overzealous with the cutting, essentially. But that being said, everything that you might need if you're an ocean-going vessel, they would be selling. So, like I said, tar, pitch, rope, desiccated food. So they would dry food and sell it. Salted fish, basically anything and everything, and then pack it up and sorry, it's been a very long day. Along with masts, decking, planking, everything you would need to be able to actually build ships or repair ships while you're at sea, and also cooperage. They would build barrels. Everything you need for on a ship had to go into a barrel, and everything from the little tiny, little tiny kegs all the way up to the biggest, hogsheads and tons and all those kinds of things. They were manufacturing nails, and so lots of raw materials, lots of finished products, and they basically went worldwide. One of their biggest exports, tobacco. Still, even in the late 1700s, still tons and tons of tobacco going to Europe, and it was the most lucrative. It's one thing to take a whole load of rice across the ocean to England or to Holland, but what they really wanted was tobacco, and they could get the highest price for tobacco. William's brother Thomas was the one who was the most outgoing, if you will. He does a lot of trips to the Caribbean, does a lot of trips to Europe, and he's going to England, different places, representing the Blunt Brothers businesses, and making sure that when the cargoes arrive, they're being sold for the proper prices, gather up the money, sending it home. And one of my absolute favorite things I've found in any of the letters was actually between between John Gray and Thomas discussing a letter that he had received from William. And if I can quote, Thomas says to John Gray in his letter of July 30th, meaning William's letter, he says he hears that a lady at The Hague, and so he's in Holland, and myself have formed a mutual attachment for each other, and because she has much money, he advises me to marry her. Tell him that for that very reason I will not. I would sooner than marry any woman on earth that has Dutch blood, either for love or money, or both united. I would ravish my own grandmother, live as a beggar, and die of famine in a ditch. But it happens that love and money are both wholly on her side. I have neither seen that one nor felt the other. And I'm like, that is very strong language for 1789. So. But it's just, I read that and I just thought, he feels very, very strongly about this. But it also is a little bit of an insight into William, that he thinks it's all right for his younger brother, to marry a woman he's never seen just because she's wealthy. I think it shows a little bit of graspiness, if it were. So, in our own collection, you can see some of the Blunt's businesses are actually represented. We have in our archaeological collection a large amount of both Japanese and Chinese porcelain from when the Blunts were living here, and there's a huge trade that kicks up after the Revolution in what they call the China trade, and so there are sort of like free trade zones set up in China where they are mass producing a lot of porcelain goods for export. And so the Blunts have ships and are invested in ships that are going to the South Pacific, going to the Pacific and the South Pacific and bringing back goods. And so we actually have physical, tangible evidence of this in our own collection. So a lot of blue transferware and different kinds of Asian porcelain found here on the property directly related to the ships that they owned going to Asia at the time. Still have some great examples, not from the blunts, but of the time period in our collection as well. So, any questions so far? Like anything?
Yes, was Shell Castle actually on Ocracoke or just off the shore? Where was it?
See, they describe it as being inside the barrier through the inlet. So just inside the Ocracoke Inlet.
And remnants of it?
There are, actually, there's a very small remnant of it left. The fire and a couple of hurricanes really did it in. And so there were, eventually, they just had to kind of abandon it. Now it is about, the picture I've seen of the gentleman standing there, it's not much bigger than the inside of this room. You know, it's, like, it's not very big. But a lot of the, so basically what they did is they brought ballast and rock and everything and just kept dumping and dumping to build up. And it ended up being 60 feet across and a half-mile long. And so it was pretty good size.
Yeah.
And so East Carolina University, still, it's actually owned by I think the Audubon Society now. And the East Carolina University uses it as their underwater archaeology lab. And so they do field schools and things out there. The article that I read said basically it's a really tricky place to dive because it's very, very shallow. So you're kind of in between snorkeling and scuba. And since it's made of oyster shell, it's very sharp, and moving around on it isn't a lot of fun. But they said that the remains of a lot of the timber structures are still there. They've just been blown around and they're not in their proper configuration, but the timbers are still there. And they show evidence of being built like ships. So when they built these wharfs, they built these things, they basically, you could tell that the people who built them were used to building ships. So everything is more of a maritime timber frame as opposed to another side. But yeah, it's still there, and apparently it's a good place to fish. A lot of people like to go out there and fish. Yeah.
Dave, does the preservation of the wood, is it the same, do you think, as preserve the wood in Venice? Is it the same the world around?
Well, if it's underwater, it's out of air.
Yeah.
Air is the main thing that's going to rot.
Will that be true any?
I mean, if it's, I would guess so. I think it's got more to do with just being submerged in water. I mean, for instance, if you go to any of the big rivers in North Carolina, South Carolina, they're in Louisiana, there are huge, what they call sinkers of cypress trees that were cut and rafted and then sunk. And there's good business with people who go around and search for these sinkers, and they're huge cypress trees, and they're well preserved. They can pull them up, saw them into boards, and use them.
But they're in freshwater.
The saltwater.
Not saltwater. In saltwater you get worms. You
Oh.
get worms and eat wood.
Okay.
Okay, so you have biological things.
That you don't get in freshwater.
Right.
Leave it to
Plus
the
those ones in
archaeologists.
freshwater, they're
Yeah.
in the mud
Mm.
where it's more, as you said,
More anaerobic.
environment. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I guess, is Venice saltwater or fresh, or both? Is it a
There's a
brackish?
marsh that they lived on to get away from the barbarians.
So if it's freshwater, then yeah, I
It
suppose.
keeps getting hit by the saltwater, I would assume, on the edges. I don't know how they would do it, but when we were there,
But if they're sunk into the mud.
and the mud may protect it from that. I hope so. There's enormous churches built on those.
I was gonna say, all of Mexico City was built on a lake, so,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
You have a question so far?
You mentioned that they were producing many items that were used in the building of ships. One thing I didn't hear you mention was sails. Did they have anything to do with it?
Yes, so there's a lot of hemp production, and cloth, and making of cloth. Probably not as much as made in Europe, but they did mention the fact that there is cloth making going on for sale, but a lot of rope too. A lot of rope.
For sale.
So I think the main thing is, you know, the main thing, the blunts find every single way you can think of to make money. So, you know, from big to small. So They're investing in animal husbandry, you know, so they're raising sheep, raising cows, raising horses. They're invested in horse racing. There's several mentions in the John Gray Blunt papers of them, you know, raising horses and racing them. And sawmills, grist mills, you know, waterworks, anything and everything that they can do to make money that they're doing. And I think distilleries, alcohol is one of the primary ways at the time of being able to preserve corn. You know, corn rots, but liquor will sit for a good long while, and it's much easier to ship alcohol than it is grain. And but they're growing rice, corn, beans, indigo, you know, basically all your staple crops, and you know, anything and everything that they can do to make money, they're doing. And I just find it. I think that the tedious thing must have been the accounting behind it. So one of the things that essentially the John Gray Blunt Papers is I wouldn't say, I mean, it is fascinating. To most people, it'd probably be very dry, but it is a 4-volume collection of I think they sorted through 10,000 or more documents. I think, wasn't it? Yeah, so I think they didn't publish all of them, but they sorted through about 10,000 documents and came up with 4 volumes of papers, and it's a great glimpse into what business was like from about 1773 to about 1830 when John Gray dies. And if I could sum it up, it's all about keeping track of who owes who what. It's constant, you know, this ship is arriving in New Bern, you know, find out what's on it, find out how much you sold. I need whatever money that you get from that to turn around and go find Bob Smith, give Bob Smith the money that I owe for this, and make sure that he takes that on and pays this guy for this, you know, and it's always like, how much did you get for the tobacco? Well, if you got that much for the tobacco, make sure you pay this guy, get the silver. It's all about Spanish silver if they can get it. And it's just this constant sort of whack-a-mole with the debts that they have to pay people for everything that you can think of. So, oh man, I bought this tract of land from this guy and I forgot to pay him for it, so make sure you sell this many hands of tobacco so that I can turn around, I can give him the money. While you're taking him that, go get the money that I'm owed from this guy and pay this other guy. And so it's constant letter writing between the brothers and their business associates to figure out who has money, when it's coming, and who they need to pay with it. And it must have been incredibly frustrating because, you know, a letter, especially, you know, there was letters between William, John Gray, and Thomas is in England, or he's in Holland, and he's like, did you get this money? And you think about how long did that letter take to get from here to there for them to have to turn around and go, no, I didn't get it, you didn't give me, you know, and to send it back. And it must have been incredibly frustrating to have to constantly be scraping, to be that wealthy, but constantly be scraping to have to pay off the debts that you have. But it's just a fascinating little insight into the ins and outs of one of the largest businesses in North Carolina at the time.
What was the interrelationship between the brothers? Were they partners or individuals doing business in a fraternal but different kind of way? How
Both.
did that work?
Both. There is a core business that they have that is John Gray, Blunt, and Thomas together as Blunt brothers. William is also invested in that, and so but he's not necessarily part of the day-to-day running of that business. And so he is the sort of the face of the family, and so he's the one that's out and about, especially as a politician. You know, he's like, hey, you really need to talk to my brother John. You know, if you got this and you're doing this, you need to talk to him. And so he's the one making connections and sending people, but John Gray and Thomas are really the ones who are the day-to-day running of Blunt Brothers. Each one of them have their own farms, plantations. Each one of them has their own separate business interests on top of everything else, but there's that core family business, and then each one of them has their own business interests outside of that. John Gray is probably the one that has the most different things. Some of William's younger brothers are just simply farmers. or soldiers, but Thomas is probably next as far as like the number of different businesses, the number of things that he's involved in. William is more of a money man in that sense, like putting money into the business and deriving income from it. It's kind of both. They have the core business together, but then they're also, making money literally in every other way they can at the same time.
When William's financial ship went down,
Yes.
Did brothers have to pay his widow anything, or did his widow have to pay the
That's a
brothers anything?
very interesting question. No. And actually, that brings up probably the biggest problem between the brothers. So when William dies in 1800, his children were promised inheritance, especially his minor children were promised inheritance when they got older. And so William's, one of William's son-in-laws and his half-brother are overseeing this. By the time the girls get to be about 18, they reach out to John Gray and said, hey, the girls are of age, they need their inheritance and everything. And John Gray says, there is none. And there is a series of really nasty letters back and forth, including one, is it Pleasant Miller, I think?
Pleasant Miller.
Yeah, Pleasant Miller calls him a son of a bitch in a letter. And that is incredibly strong language for 1820s, I guess. Teens, 18 teens. Yeah, for him to call him a son of a bitch in writing, that's strong letters, or strong words. So, he basically did his nieces dirty in the deal and took the land that was supposed to be the girls and sold it and kept the money. And so, when William dies, his children, his minor children, are essentially wards of his brother Wiley, Pleasant Miller, and then I think it was the two of them, and then one of the Whites. I think Hugh Lawson White, or Hugh White, maybe.
Yeah, he's a guardian of the, one of the sons.
Billy, or
Richard.
I think
it's
Yeah,
Richard.
so there's several family members and prominent friends that take people on. But as I actually read several times today, William did the same thing for prominent citizens there in North Carolina and other people, including one who he writes to his brother and says, this is one of the most useless humans I've ever known, but his dad was good to me and I can't turn him away. My wife despises him. I don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas? Because he has to do something, but he can't be here because my wife hates him. So he's trying to do right by this kid, but he was like, I don't know what he could possibly do that would suit him because nothing suits him. He's kind of an idiot. So it was actually a pretty funny letter. He was like, you think about it, and if you think of something, let me know. Otherwise, I think I'm just gonna let him like basically have fun, just basically what do you say?
Fire washer.
What do you say? It was basically I can't think of something pursuits, like diversions, like otherwise just like send him out to like just go fishing or something because I have no idea what to do with him. There's no business that suits him. So it was kind of interesting. But that is, that was something that William and his family did for a lot of people. Either to take them in as apprentices and teach them the shipping business, or to, if somebody died, to take the family and take the children in and take care of them. And so it's it was nice that somebody at least tried to do that for his kids, even if their uncle did do them wrong. Yeah.
Is there any idea to compare them with the Washingtons and the Jeffersons and stuff of the period as far as wealth? We know Washington was pretty wealthy. Where do they stand?
They were probably the wealthiest people in North Carolina. I don't know.
Was at the time.
Yeah, there were probably very few. If there was anybody in North Carolina that had more, as a family, had more wealth than them, I don't know who it would have been. So, just the fact they had several million acres of land is a lot more than what most folks had. And for them, to own multiple ships, they had an island, it's like everything, multiple stores, and just, if there was somebody more wealthy than them in North Carolina, I don't know who it would be. I don't know how, dollar to dollar, how comparable they are to, Washington and Jefferson, but they're definitely in the same category as far as, landowners, slave owners, basically very large plantations. Like I said, William's father Jacob had a 6,000 acre plantation and 37 slaves. Later, when Sharp has it, it's somewhere around the same, and he's got 47 enslaved people working for him. So, very large holdings for North Carolina in the 1790s. So.
Did William have business interests in East Tennessee in addition to
In addition
the
to,
business in North Carolina?
as far as I know, mostly in East Tennessee, yes, he did. Actually, yes, he was invested, for one thing, he was invested in the King Iron Works. So, and I'm sure if he was invested there, he may have had interest in the boat yard. It's possible, Kingsport, Tennessee is the essentially the headwaters of the, is it French Broad?
Holston.
Is it the Holston? Holston. So it's the furthest up that you could navigate, and so there was big, the King family had their ironworks there, but they also had the boat yard, and so a lot of the longboats and trade boats that are going down the rivers were coming out from up there. And actually, when William dies, that's where some of his enslaved individuals are actually sold to the King family to settle some debts. But he's got, as governor, he's kind of hands off a little bit as far as business. He's kind of working through intermediaries. He's still buying and selling land, but he's just basically quietly doing it through other people. He had sheriffs and other business associates that would quietly go around and buy up tracts of land and do things or sell parts of his holdings and things. So he was very careful to not be seen to be using his position to better himself, at least openly. It's kind of a well-known secret, or like a very poorly hidden secret. But,
Thank God we don't do that now.
no, it's totally different. As I like to say, we like to think of them being a little bit more altruistic because they have wigs and buckle shoes, but politics was just as dirty then, if not dirtier. Because you could say one thing to one group, say one thing to another group, and then just deny you said it to either one. So nobody was
Didn't
filming.
write it down.
Yeah, just don't write it down.
But, ultimately though, it's kind of interesting. I've always wondered if William had survived, what he would have thought of the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, here is what's 2/3 of the modern United States suddenly opening up within,
He'd have moved.
several years ago, shortly after his death.
Who's that man licking his lips?
Yeah, I've always thought like he would have ended up in my home state of Missouri. I always thought that would have been someplace that he could have ended up, Arkansas, Texas, somewhere west of the Mississippi. When all this land opened up, that would have been, because he was only 50 when he died. So we still had plenty of time left to really make a difference. So, I think that if he'd just been patient and not gotten ahead of himself, it would have been, a whole different ending to his life. There'd probably be towns in Texas named after him or something. So. But I've met descendants from all over the world, so they've really spread themselves, including here still in Knoxville. William Blount V is insurance, I think he's an insurance agent in Farragut. So, they're still here, they're still in business. So.
They had a lot of boys in their family, that's why there are a lot of bloods.
Nowhere near as much as the Severes, though.
Oh, no.
Look, 18 children.
That man needed a hobby.
Yes.
It's an old one, but a good one.
It's a good one.
You need a hobby.
Three wives and 18 children, so, including Bonnie Kate Severe here. So.
One at a time, one hopes.
Yes.
Yes, no hurry.
But they kept dying on him. I think maybe
Well,
having all those
she-
children had something to do with
Yeah,
it. So,
10 kids and she just quit.
but any other questions at all? Anything?
What happened to the Catholic strain in the family? Did that persist once they came to the colonies?
No, not directly. They're Anglican. By the time they get here, they're worshiping with the Anglicans, and here in Knoxville specifically with the Presbyterians.
Yeah.
So, but I don't. The English side of the Blount family, they hid their Catholicism for a while until it was safer to sort of come out of hiding. A lot of them because of Henry VIII and the English Civil War, they kind of had to be like, oh no, we're not Catholic. So, and I just learned something recently about one of William's ancestors actually would have been king had he lived. So, Thomas? No. Either way, one of William's ancestors, Elizabeth Blunt, was the mistress of Henry VIII, and she had a son, and he named him Leroy. The end of, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Leroy, meaning son of the king. And it was an open thing, like, this is my son, and I'm all right with it. I don't care what anybody thinks. And he died at like 17 or 18 years old. So he would have been king of England. So William's ancestor would have been king, but he died at a very young age, and Elizabeth got it. And, obviously the rest is history. But we had a very interesting English woman who brought us an immense amount of research that she had done on the Blunt family. Just spent 30 years researching them because she happened to see their name on the wall of a local parish church.
Wow.
Yeah, she basically came and was like, I need this out of my head. Here you go. I'm 85 and I don't want to do this anymore. And gave us all this research. So there was quite a bit of primary source documents on that era of the Blunts. So it's quite interesting. Any other questions at all? Well, thank you for letting me ramble. Y'all. I appreciate it.
Marvelous. Thank you.